I think that in surviving what society has deemed as, okay, well, you have the characteristics of what a side character is, but you don't actually want to be slotted as a side character. How do you survive that? And, sometimes I've just leaned in to people's assumptions because there is a lot of power to being underestimated.
And welcome back. Alyssa, you're not my sidekick. We're like
Am I your side piece?
No. That means a totally different thing.
I know. I was just being funny. I can be your sidekick.
I don't want a sidekick. I don't want to be the main person where the buck stops.
So there's no lead. We're co-sidekicks.
We're like linking arms. This is a two-hander. Well, I'm excited to talk about sidekicks today with two of my favorite main characters. Our first panelist is the founder of the nonprofit Rise, a 2019 Nobel Peace Prize nominee, and a 2022 Time Woman of the Year. It's Amanda Nguyen. Amanda, welcome.
Hi.
Every time I read your credits, or like when I talk about you with like a friend or mention you, I'm like, yeah, she's like a Nobel Peace Prize nominee, and she talked about Target on my podcast.
I love it. And side pieces today, right? Yeah.
How are you doing? What's new with you?
I'm doing well. I'm organizing my fridge. We just talked about vacuums earlier, so there's the little things that get me through.
Up next, you can watch our next panelist in the newest season of How I Met Your Father on Hulu, streaming now. Or if you're in LA, you can catch her doing stand-up at Dynasty Typewriter with Netflix is a Joke Radio on March 21st. Tien, Tran, welcome.
Hello.
It's so good to see you.
It's so good to see you too.
I want to start talking a little bit about sidekicks with you because you play a supporting character in How I Met Your Father, Ellen
Yes,
Gilbert.
I do.
Is she a sidekick, and is it more fun to play somebody who like supports the main character or to be the main character?
Oh gosh. Okay. Do you want to get into an existential conversation about the industry? Because then because I do feel a certain sort of way about like specifically characters of color and like queer characters and queer characters of color kind of
let's get into it. Let's go. Let's get right there. Let's do it. Tien, we're here. Let's hear it.
Okay. So for me personally, as an experience being in the show, I actually really do love being a part of the like supporting cast because I still feel very new in my sort of acting career. And so I don't know if I would be able to carry a show as the lead right now, just to be totally honest.
Okay, I'm just, yes. I would be the audience.
Amanda would watch.
Okay, yes. Amanda, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I would love to at some point, and like that's something that I'm working towards. But like industry wide, I feel like it's frustrating to see so many like very specific sort of like, you always have your white leads and then you have your like characters of color who are made to be sidekicks. And they are oftentimes made to be sort of like their whole purpose is just to help this person on their journey. And so you very rarely learn anything about them. You very rarely get any sort of like internal conflicts about them. And so I would like that to change. But to answer your question of like currently on the show, like I do, they're going to be like, oh, she hates being on the show. No, I love being on the show as a supporting cast member. And like getting to slowly start to see that like they are giving more of our other characters kind of main character energy, as everyone says.
Amanda, you have been nodding this whole time. So I want to like keep opening whatever can of worms Tien started opening. And I would love to hear your thoughts on who's a sidekick and who's a main character.
Okay, well, it's, as we're recording, International Women's History Day. And I think that women, and especially women of color, are the main characters of their lives. And that there's absolutely an issue with who gets to have that empathy to be a main character, not only within Hollywood, but also within our government, within who gets to like that Hamilton song, right? Like, who gets to pen and tell my story or whatever. It's really getting it wrong. But, I would like to tell folks who don't see themselves represented that your story matters too. That doesn't mean that there aren't sidekicks out there. In fact, like some of my favorite characters in storytelling of all time are sidekicks, like Samwise Gamgee. He's the real hero, in my opinion, of Lord of the Rings, or Chewbacca. But yeah, I think those who are underrepresented deserve to be main characters in all the ways.
What have been some viewing experiences for you or reading experiences for you where there has been a sidekick that has frustrated you because you're like, I really wish that this person had more to them?
I can talk about the other side of that, which is I just read this book called A Mountain Sings, and it's by a Vietnamese poet, a woman who wrote it. And I had never written or read a book by a Vietnamese woman before. And the way that it touched me, I just read it on the plane, like the entire sitting. And then I was eating dinner with a friend and I actually pulled the book out as we were waiting. I was like, I'm so sorry to be that awful friend, but I have to finish this book. Anyways, so the way that I had never seen myself represented like that, the way that the words just reached out from the page and gripped me, I had never had that experience before. And, it really just shook me to my core. So I know that like that's what representation is, but I don't like it when we are used again as a character foil for another person when our trauma is exploited. When you look into the literature or movies about the Vietnam War, in Vietnam we call it the American War, right? Like the perspective is often not of us by us. So even if we are getting visibility in terms of side characterships, when do we get to be the main character? And in this book, it was amazing.
And you know what? Honestly, I don't think taking out a book to read as you're waiting for a restaurant is any ruder than taking your phone out.
That's true.
I agree.
No ruder. Alyssa, what do you make of the sidekick trope? And like, what do you make of, so just so our listeners know that the reason that we're talking about this is because there was an article in the New York Times about Kamala Harris sort of as like the president's sidekick. And we were like, interesting. How do we feel about this? And Alyssa, I was wondering how you feel about the article and like the sidekick in politics in general.
So when I thought about it, I don't know. I don't agree. It's like, I think that there are some people who could be considered sidekicks. I think that Kamala's kind of like I think that someone needs to give Kamala some like good platforms where she can just go out and kind of do her own thing. I feel like she got some of the really hard shit that she's only going to get beat up on. And it's like when I look at it, I do think that Joe Biden was more of a sidekick to Barack Obama. And like, I also am not sure if that's a good thing. Like in politics, I think there are too many egos for there ever to really be a sidekick. Like I thought about it and it's like no one, like when you look in pop culture, you can identify sidekicks. And the funny thing is that in pop culture, I thought about like my favorite TV shows, and my favorite TV shows, my favorite character in all the TV shows is the sidekick. Like they are the person that's more relatable to me, and they are the person who you kind of are like always rooting for, much more than the main character because they're getting all the resources, right? So it's like, I prefer Rhoda Morgenstern to Mary Tyler Moore. Ethel was as funny as Lucy. Who doesn't want more Cousin Greg in Succession? I mean, it is, I feel like sidekicks are my people. And in DC and in politics, it's like, I don't know. I feel like people need to maybe like let Kamala be Kamala and let her be her own person. I feel like DC political culture is trying to define her as more of a sidekick, and that's really fucking stupid.
Yeah, it seems as though the idea of the sidekick is like a little bit feminized. Mm-hmm. Like the assumption is like I think back to a few years ago, there was a show on network TV called like Single Parents or something like that. So, and like there were ads all over in Los Angeles, billboards and stuff. There was a billboard for single parents, and front and center on the billboard was like a white guy. And it's like, how many single parents, in terms of like percentage in the US, are like white guys raising children on their own? And the answer, like, it is completely like antithetical to the reality of like, but they had to make a show with like a white guy in the middle, even though it was a show about an experience that is primarily had by women and women of color in a lot of cases. And it was like, I remember thinking like, this is very stupid, and I will not watch this show because of the, like, just because of the billboard. It like made me so angry. I wonder, Tien, do you think men think of women as natural sidekicks?
I mean, yes. What is that famous phrase, like, behind every great man is a woman doing
Exhausted
everything?
woman?
Like,
Right.
yeah, like a totally exhausted, like, a woman who hasn't been an underappreciated woman. I think it's just like we live in this like cis heteronormative patriarchy, and I think we're starting to change that. But I know a lot of my, dear friends who are in who are in straight, right? Look at me hedging on saying straight. Straight relationships. We have women, like amazing friends of mine, who are like working badasses, but at the end of the day, they are still doing so much both emotional labor and also just like labor in the home. And like it's almost like the men, they're not being like, you got to keep the house, but it's not like they're saying anything differently. Do you know what I mean? Like,
They're
there's
not like,
a lot
I
of,
gotta keep the house.
yeah, they're not like, I've got to keep the house. There's a lot of weaponized incompetence going around, and and I think because of that, it like relegates women to becoming sort of the sidekick or doing everything or like making sure that everything is taken care of, which is fucked up.
Mm-hmm. Amanda, you are, you work as the head of an organization, and you're very visible. Do you ever get treated by people who don't know any better? Do people ever treat you like you couldn't possibly be in charge? And how does that go?
Oh yeah, I get mansplained all the time about the laws that I've written.
And can you tell us any like specific stories, like about someone telling you about a law that you wrote?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So there are times when I go and I sit, in some kind of political office, and we've passed the law there already, and the person goes, oh yeah, there was this law that was passed, and like, here are all the tenants. And at first I wanted to fight back, and then I just realized I'm just gonna let this sink in, and then just wait for the dust to settle and say, yeah, I wrote that, and then watch as the embarrassment sinks in. That, like, that's a very satisfying moment for me. There have been plenty of times where I've walked in and, I had to meet the principal member, whatever. And, my assistant, who is a guy, will walk in and they'll be addressing him as the CEO and founder and not me. And I remember this one instance where it's an intern friend, but an intern did that. And and the member came out and addressed me. And on the table, there was an article, and it was featuring me.
Shut up.
And that intern's face went super pale.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So the thing is that, I think that in the history of the patriarchy, women have been side characters. We are the wind beneath their wings. Our thoughts are their ideas. A lot of people say Albert Einstein, his most brilliant ideas were actually his wife's, right? And or his first wife. I think that in surviving what society has deemed as, okay, well, you have the characteristics of what a side character is, but you don't actually want to be slotted as a side character. How do you survive that? And sometimes I've just leaned in to people's assumptions, because there is a lot of power to being underestimated.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. It's like every time, and look, I always try to chalk it up. I was young, when I worked in the White House, I was young, I was a woman. But when I first took over as White House Deputy Chief of Staff, because the person who had come before me would take me to meetings before I had been White House Deputy Chief, and I saw how people treated him, And then when I took his job, I mean, you guys, some of those meetings, I was like, wait, are they going to physically fucking pat me on the head? Like, am I just going to get a pat on the head right now? And it was really hard. But to Amanda's point, I kind of like weaponized being the sidekick or underestimated, because they'd be like, you know who underestimated me? Fucking Governor Cuomo. He underestimated me. And you know who didn't? Chris Christie. He came into me, and it's like, and I don't care if everyone fucking hates Chris Christie, but I'm just going to tell you the truth. He came in and he treated me like I was his fucking equal and was like, here's what I need and here's what I'm going to do. He came prepared. He gave me a presentation. This was all during Hurricane Sandy. And I was like, you know what? Fucking thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because it was always hard for me. And a lot of times, and Amanda, I'm sure that you have done this, I come in prepared like I'm going to war. I used to go in prepared like there was no question anyone was ever going to ask me that I didn't know. And I didn't care if I looked like Gidget in real life. You know, like I don't care. I was unassuming, and sometimes I had like sweaters that I could have made me tender heart Care Bear, but who knows? And to go in and everyone's like, oh, hi, precious, you know, like a little pat on the head. And then you're like, all right, let's get down to business. And you just open up with both barrels and you're like, oh, I'm not here to play. Like, let's go. And it is, you will see people literally shift back in their seats. You will see them like, oh my God, I thought this was going to be easy. Maybe it's not going to be so easy. And then you're asking them the questions that they can't fucking answer, but you can. And you're asking those questions because you know they can't answer them because they underestimated you. And so that is definitely something that, like, I never mind, like, go ahead and underestimate me, you know? And it was one of those things where even when we'd be in groups, like political meetings or like a DNC event, and they'd all gravitate towards the guys. You know, everyone wanted to talk to them. And then Dan Pfeiffer, God bless, shout out to Pfeiffer at all times. He was like, you have to talk to Alyssa. She's the one who's got all the power. And, you know, that was always his go-to when we were things like that. But it never ended. It never really changed. I mean, even the people who I threw back on their heels and was like, oh no, I am loaded for bear. You know, the next time you'd have a meeting with them, they didn't always change their approach, but you know, at least I felt more confident every time. But yeah, Amanda, 100%. Like, though I was never lucky enough to be in a meeting where an article about me was on the table and I could just be like, while we're waiting, let's open up this magazine.
Yeah,
that never happened.
Amanda,
that's so deeply satisfying.
Yeah,
it's so deeply satisfying to have to hear that.
That one.
Don't mind if I do.
Amanda, I'm picturing you holding up a magazine with your face on the cover over your face and then lowering it.
It was actually more like I present to you. Do you recognize this? Is this familiar?
Oh my goodness, that poor intern. That poor
No,
intern.
That intern
Really?
deserved it. That intern deserved that moment. You should know better.
I guess it is like a they have to learn kind of a moment. Like,
yeah.
Look, it was harsh, but they have to learn. They must learn. Is there ever like a moment where you kind of find yourself preferring to be the sidekick? Because like in some cases you want to go into something and be like, okay, I'm in charge. But other times it's just sort of like how do you sink into a sidekick role knowing that it's not your time to be at the forefront? You know what I mean? Like if you're working with somebody else or they're the ones that should be speaking up, like how do you kind of like navigate that, being used to being like somebody that's more at the forefront? Amanda, you're nodding. I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, allyship. You know, I think that's one of the key moments in which it's not about being a voice for the voiceless. You know, if you have privileged resources, and let's say, you know, a lot of the work that I do is organizing for sexual violence around the world. You know, I'm not a constituent of every single country. So in a different country, you know, it's their moment. And how do you uplift them by stepping out of that limelight and making sure that their voices are centered, not yours. So yeah, pass the mic.
Yeah, I remember reading, Alyssa, that like women in the Obama administration kind of had a strategy for de-sidekickification them, you know, whatever. I just made up the word. But de-sidekicking kickifying themselves by essentially citing each other in meetings and being like so-and-so, like Tien said.
Oh, hold
like
and
Amanda
sometimes if that person wasn't in the meeting, they'd be like, you know what? Kathy was making that point yesterday. Let's get her. Because the thing is, you'd be in the meeting the day before and someone would make a point and no one would really, sometimes, not all the time, on occasion, someone would not pay that much attention. You'd be like, all right, it's like a fart in the forest. I guess they weren't into it. And then the next day people are citing it like it was their idea. And it was, no, hold on. Let's get Nancy Ann. Let's get Kathy, and it was a useful exercise.
Yeah, it's something that we try to do in writers' rooms as well, like in the experiences that I've had in different writers' rooms and just being in, you're trying to, in rooms that I've been in have been like very diverse, but there is a particular type of white man that will take up a lot of space and like try to take ideas from other people, or in other words, just essentially repeat the idea that women have just pitched as a joke. And so we'll always I think it's like a kind of an unspoken thing amongst like the female writers to be like, hey, like that's actually like Sarah's joke, that Sarah brought that up, like that's a great idea, or like trying to make sure that we have space and time to like acknowledge who actually came up with the idea.
I noticed that too in writers' rooms. I think like a really healthy one, everyone does that for people, because I think that there's I try to give people a good faith read where it's like sometimes you just are sort of like lost in your own thoughts and you hear something but don't realize that you're hearing it. And so it kind of like intermingles with your own thoughts and you don't necessarily remember that someone else said it. You know what I mean? Because you're in this soup basically of everyone's thoughts and ideas in a writer's room and stuff. But if I would hear something pitched that was already pitched by somebody, I would say like, oh yeah, like Tom was saying that yesterday, or like Tara said that yesterday and I thought it was like a really good idea and I'm really excited we're talking about it again. Like here's something else, like, or oh yeah, +1 to that, or like jump in after somebody's really good idea and hope that like it just kind of people register who said it, just because it doesn't appear that way in scripts. Like you're not like, oh, this person wrote this joke, but in a room it kind of matters for everyone to understand that everybody's contributing, for sure. Okay, let's wrap up the sidekick conversation with who is your sidekick and who are you a sidekick for? I'm going to give you some time to think about who your sidekick is. Or are you in a relationship with somebody or a friendship with somebody where you switch off being the main person and the sidekick? Alyssa, you go first. Who's your sidekick?
Well, I think that my sidekick and I switch on and off, and it's my oldest friend, Kara. And it's like sometimes you're the one supporting and sometimes she's the one supporting. And I think that we just have such a good flow after all these years. Literally, I was talking to her about a premiere and she was like, she calls me Chicken. She's like, Chicken, let me know if you need any help. Like she's like, it's your night. And I was like, no. I was also like, Kara, we're good. There are people who are going to set it up. We don't have to like work the rope line or anything. And she was like, but that is just, that is, and I was her maid of honor. I mean, I just love her so much. Also, I think that my cat Midge is my sidekick.
You know what? Maid of honor is a sidekick role. That's
Yeah,
your friend
totally.
is like, will you be my sidekick on this very important day for me? I am princess,
Right.
you are sidekick.
And you have to be the best sidekick you can be. That is I actually think it's one of the most important sidekick roles.
Amanda, what are your thoughts? Who is your sidekick and who are you a sidekick for? Also, have you ever been a maid of honor and was it fun or no?
That one is too personal. So maybe like I'll reveal that in a book or something because it went horribly. Oh my God, I'll be having like flashbacks.
Oh no. Oh
Yeah. So I also have a mutual sidekick / main character switch off moment, but with a dog. So my dog, Lucky, I mean, like if anyone has ever owned a dog, they know that like when you're walking the dog, you're definitely the sidekick to your dog. Like everybody comes up and like pets your dog and you're just like, I'm also here. You know what I'm saying? Lucky was a golden retriever. And I actually want to get him painted because because I like all those like, you know, traditional paintings of dogs and they look like they're like generals or something. Anyways, that's what I'm. He's definitely not a sidekick for me.
Oh, that's so cute. You know what? We got one of those, we didn't get one of like him looking like a general or like a fancy Edwardian boy.
Yeah.
We didn't get one of those for our dog, but we did. Like, there was this thing on Etsy where you can send them a photo of your pet and they will like make a painting of it. And we did that and it looks really nice. And my
I have
kid
several.
points at it. Yeah, my kid points at it sometimes and is like, Luca. And it's like, yep, that's a painting of Luca. That's how you know it's a good painting, if a baby knows that what it's supposed to be. Tien, same question for you. Who's your sidekick and who are you a sidekick for?
I think my wife and I are like good sort of sidekick main character. We're like both pushing each other to be main characters. So I think we're just kind of like switching off and on all the time, which feels really nice. Like when I think being the partner of an actor is like a very specific thing where like I have a lot of sort of very social, my job is like very social front facing. And so she's so good about supporting me in that way. And like, she's working on something very specific right now that is like, I'm very excited to uplift her. So I feel like we have a very good balanced two sidekicks that are pushing each other to be main characters and seesawing back and forth.
Oh, I love that. I sometimes feel like a sidekick main character fluctuation relationship with my sister, but I kind of prefer being in the sidekick role with her. She's younger than me. She's like 6 years younger. And I like being her sidekick because that means I get to get like furious and say wild shit. Like the sidekick is the one who gets to like say irresponsible things and be like, let's get him. You know, like the main character doesn't have to be the one that's like, let's get him. The side character does that. And that's way more fun. So I think my sister and I sometimes switch off. Like we don't see each other that often because she lives in, you know, Minnesota. But when we do, there's like kind of energy that's sort of like kind of switches back and forth. And as the older sister, being a sidekick is like a fun little switch of roles.